Alright, I'm going to try to get this in here. Navigable waters. A little bit hard to hold this. Navigable waters of the United States in Corpus Juris Secundum, volume 65. We're going to talk a little bit today about the navigable waters of the Richelieu River, the Lake Champlain, the Lachute, or what's also known as the Poop Chute River, and then of course we're going to talk about the pinhole in the bathtub at Ticonderoga, the Dam A of Lake George, at the outlet of Lake George. Ladies and gentlemen, trying to get some very simple answers out of the state of New York, trying to get some very simple answers out of Warren County and Essex County, Washington County, New York, concerning the massive damages that the state of New York, in court, many times complained about the damages to private and public property on Lake George, New York, caused directly by the erratic up and down ice and water levels on Lake George, New York, particularly in the wintertime during the lake drawdown. They draw the lake down, and then in the spring with the runoff and the snowpack melt and the ice comes floating back up and of course destroys islands and shoreline, boathouses, and a lot of docks. It's been going on for 150 plus years. The dock destruction on Lake George by ice floating up and down has been a big deal to the state of New York during prosecutions of the people responsible. Now, the Army Corps of Engineers in 1975 gave notice to the state of New York that once navigable, always navigable. In other words, the Lachute River, before all the dams were installed, well, you could take a canoe down the Lachute from Lake George. You could slide your canoe, just like the kayakers do in whitewater, aggressive navigation. They could take their canoes down the Lachute from Lake George to Lake Champlain. It was, in fact, navigable, and if you have any doubt, just ask your local kayaking and your local whitewater rapids running canoers. Now, for year after year after year after year after year after decade after decade after decade after decade after decade after century, almost 2 centuries, this Dam A and the erratic lake levels caused by the ponding back or the flooding of the Lake George Basin using Dam A has been made a very famous matter of public record. It appears in grand jury proceedings going back to 1829, and again in 1847, and then there were lawsuits and litigation all through the latter part of the 1800s into the 1900s, and the mess is still continuing at this very moment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I've gone to the state of New York and I've very simply asked them who paid for all the damages. Where in your records of the state of New York does it show who paid for all these damages to private boathouses and private docks on Lake George? It's a very simple question. It's not complicated at all. Whoever reimbursed the private property owners for the destruction done to their docks and boathouses? So we're waiting for an answer. I can't find any records of any damages being paid by the operators of this dam. Which brings us to issue number 2. Who, in fact, were the operators of the dam and who, in fact, had the obligation to, lawfully and correctly operate this Dam A? Well, in the litigation that the state pursued, the state courts declared that the state had ultimate authority over controlling the lake levels. And the state courts of New York granted supervisory and control authority for the lake levels on Lake George to New York State. Now, there's a little bit of a wrinkle and a new chapter in this matter. The United States government, particularly the United States Army, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers of the United States claims that once navigable, always navigable, and that Lake George is in fact a navigable waterway of the United States. So this is kind of a game changer, because the United States of America would have been an indispensable party that was never noticed of these proceedings by county and state authorities in New York. Interesting little wrinkle there. Were the people of the United States given adequate notice of a legal matter affecting their rights in the navigable waters of Lake George, New York, as an indispensable party? And I think the answer to this is, well, obviously they weren't. They weren't given any notice. It's sort of like the people that had all their property destroyed by this International Paper and Power Company and the System Properties. System Properties being owned by International Paper and Power. They're the responsible parties for the erratic up and down, up and down, up and down ice sheet and water levels, with, at least so far, the state of New York. The state of New York itself was obliged to control and regulate and be the authority over the up and down, up and down, up and down of the ice sheet and the water that did all this damage. Now, going back to navigable waters here in the laws of the United States, the very interesting part about navigable waters, I guess you can see that pretty well. Navigable waters of the United States, that makes the U.S. government and particularly the United States Army an indispensable party to determining whose waterway it actually is. Does it belong to the people of the United States, or is it an exclusive property of the people of the state of New York, or the mill pond for the International Paper and Power Corporation and System Properties? These are the legal questions, and I'm going to sum this one up because I get accused of being long-winded. I want the Attorney General of the state of New York, I want the Commissioner for the Department of Environmental Conservation, I want the Governor of the state, and the town supervisors, county supervisors for Washington County, Warren County, and Essex County, along with the townships. There's 6 or 7 townships around Lake George. I want them to release to the public any record of payments made to any persons who've had their private boathouses and private bulkheads or seawalls, or private islands, or the state's islands, or the private docks, the marina docks particularly. Who is it that was ever made whole by the payment of damages for this massive destruction that all of these state authorities had been engaging in indictments of criminal courts and or indictments in criminal courts, excuse me, and civil lawsuits against the operators and perpetrators, if you will, of Dam A by manipulating the ice and water levels on Lake George during the wintertime and in the early spring. So I'm going to leave it right there. I think the authorities in the state of New York have enough intelligence to understand that FOIL, Freedom of Information Law, and the Freedom of Information Act not only entitles me to make these requests for records, but somebody's got the information, and I want the state of New York and the counties and the townships to provide it. It's time to understand whether or not all this damage, which was foreseeable, they knew what the lake was doing. They'd known it for years. They knew what the damages were happening, and it was foreseeable. And they have an obligation to explain to the people whose property was damaged, whoever got paid any damages. All right, going to leave it right there. Hasta la vista. God bless, and you betcha we will be coming back.